Sometimes the most unexpected words come from the smallest voices. When 7-year-old twins looked up at a stranger with dirt-stained cheeks and desperate eyes, their plea would shatter every wall he'd built around his heart. "Marry our mama," they whispered, clutching his work-worn hands like lifelines. What started as a simple act of kindness on a dusty Montana road would become a story that proves family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the courage to love when logic says you shouldn't. This is the true story of how two broken children, one struggling mother, and a lonely rancher discovered that the biggest risks often lead to the most beautiful rewards. In a world where people walk past each other's pain, three strangers were about to learn that sometimes the family you choose becomes more precious than the one you're born into. Jake Morrison had always believed that some people were meant to walk through life alone. At 42, he'd made peace with the silence that filled his ranch house every evening, the empty chair at his dinner table, and the way his voice echoed in rooms that had once buzzed with family conversations. The Montana landscape stretched endlessly around his property, vast and beautiful, but it couldn't fill the hollow spaces in his chest that had been carved out by years of disappointment and loss. The morning sun was just beginning to paint the sky in soft pinks and golds when Jake loaded his truck with supplies for the weekly trip to town. His ranch, the Double M, sat 20 miles outside of Cedar Creek, Montana, a small community where everyone knew everyone else's business, and strangers were as rare as rain in August. Jake preferred it that way. The isolation suited him, gave him space to breathe without well-meaning neighbors asking when he was going to find himself a nice woman and settle down properly. He'd tried that once. Sarah had been everything a man could want in a wife, beautiful, kind, with dreams of filling their home with children and laughter. They'd planned it all out, painted the spare bedroom yellow for the nursery, picked out names for the babies they'd have. But life had other plans, and after 3 miscarriages and a divorce that left him emotionally bankrupt, Jake had decided that some dreams weren't meant for some people. The drive to town was routine, a winding road through hills dotted with cattle and wildflowers. Jake knew every curve, every pothole, every mile marker. He'd driven this route thousands of times over the years, first as a boy with his father, then as a young man full of hope, and now as a middle-aged rancher who'd learned to find contentment in solitude. That's why the broken-down sedan on the shoulder of the road caught his attention immediately. It was a rust-colored Honda that had seen better days, steam rising from under the hood like a distress signal against the clear morning sky. Jake slowed his truck, his instincts as a neighbor kicking in despite his preference for keeping to himself. As he pulled closer, he could see movement inside the car. A woman sat in the driver's seat, her head buried in her hands, shoulders shaking in a way that suggested tears. In the back seat, 2 small figures pressed their faces against the window, their breath fogging the glass as they watched his truck approach. Jake sat in his idling truck for a moment, wrestling with himself. His first instinct was to drive on, to mind his own business and let someone else play Good Samaritan. But something about the scene tugged at him, maybe the way the children's faces looked so serious, so worried, or the defeated posture of the woman who was clearly at the end of her rope. With a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul, Jake pulled his truck to the shoulder and stepped out into the crisp morning air. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached the sedan, and he could hear muffled voices from inside. "Mama, there's a man coming," a young voice whispered. "Stay in the car, babies," came the reply, tired and strained. Jake approached the driver's side window carefully, not wanting to startle anyone. The woman looked up at him through the glass, and he was struck by the exhaustion in her eyes. She was probably in her early 30s, with brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and worry lines that seemed too deep for someone so young. She rolled down the window halfway, maintaining a protective barrier while still acknowledging his presence. "Can I help you?" she asked, though it was clear she was the one who needed help. "Looks like you might be having some car trouble," Jake said, keeping his voice gentle and non-threatening. "I'm Jake Morrison. I live just up the road. Thought I'd see if there's anything I could do." The woman studied his face for a moment, as if trying to determine whether he was trustworthy. Jake understood her caution. A woman alone with children had to be careful about strangers, even in a place like Montana where people generally looked out for each other. "I'm Emma," she said finally. "Emma Chen. And, yes, we're having trouble. The car just started smoking and making terrible noises about 10 minutes ago." Jake nodded and gestured toward the hood. "Mind if I take a look?" I'm not a mechanic, but I know my way around an engine well enough.
Emma hesitated, then nodded. That would be very kind of you. Thank you.
As Jake walked around to the front of the car, he became aware of two pairs of eyes tracking his every movement. The children in the back seat, twins by the look of them, were watching him with the intense focus that children reserved for situations that felt important and, potentially life-changing. He popped the hood and was immediately greeted by a cloud of steam and the acrid smell of overheated metal. The radiator was clearly shot, and, from the looks of the engine, this car had been running on hope and prayers for quite some time. Jake had seen enough broken-down vehicles in his 42 years to know that this wasn't something that could be fixed with a quick patch job. He closed the hood and walked back to Emma's window. "I'm afraid it's not good news," he said gently. "Your radiator's blown, and, from what I can see, there are a few other issues that are going to need professional attention. This car isn't going anywhere under its own power." Emma's face crumpled, and, for a moment, Jake thought she might start crying right there in front of him. She took a shaky breath and composed herself, but he could see the fear in her eyes. "How much do you think it would cost to fix?" she asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be what she wanted to hear. Jake ran a hand through his graying hair. "Honestly? More than the car's worth, I'd guess. You're looking at several $100s at least, maybe more depending on what else they find when they get under the hood." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Jake could practically see Emma's mind racing, calculating options that probably didn't exist, trying to figure out how to solve a problem with resources she clearly didn't have. "Mama," one of the children called softly from the back seat. "It's okay, Lily," Emma said, her voice artificially bright. "Everything's going to be fine." But Jake could see that everything was far from fine. He'd lived long enough to recognize desperation when he saw it, and this woman was barely holding herself together. The questions started forming in his mind despite his better judgment. Where were they going? Did they have family nearby? What would happen to them now? "Is there someone I can call for you?" he offered. "Family? A friend who could come pick you up?" Emma's laugh was bitter and short. "No, there's no one to call. It's just us." The weight of that simple statement hit Jake like a physical blow. Just us. 3 people, stranded on a country road, with no one to turn to and a car that wouldn't run. He'd been alone for years, but it had been a choice, a preference born out of disappointment and self-protection. This was different. This was real isolation, the kind that came from circumstances beyond anyone's control. "Where were you headed?" he asked, though he wasn't sure why the answer mattered. "Cedar Creek," Emma said. "I have a job interview there this afternoon." Had a job interview, she corrected herself, glancing at the clock on her dashboard. "I suppose that's not happening now." Jake felt something shift inside his chest, like a door that had been locked for years suddenly, creaking open. "What kind of job?" "Waitressing at the diner." "It's not much, but it comes with a small apartment upstairs, and I thought maybe we could finally have a real home again." Emma's voice broke slightly on the last words, and Jake could see her fighting to maintain her composure in front of her children. The children. Jake had been trying not to look at them too closely, but now he found himself studying their faces. They were beautiful kids, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with their mother's brown hair and serious dark eyes. They looked clean but tired, like they'd been traveling for a while. Their clothes were neat but worn, and they clutched small backpacks as if they contained everything they owned in the world. "Mama, are we going to sleep in the car again?" the boy asked quietly. Again. The word hit Jake like a punch to the gut. These children had been sleeping in cars, living out of suitcases, moving from place to place with their mother who was clearly doing everything she could to build them a stable life. Emma turned around to face her children, and Jake could see her struggling to find words that would comfort them without being lies. "We'll figure something out, Sam. We always do." But Jake could see the cracks in her brave facade, the way her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her son's hair, the exhaustion that seemed to seep from her very bones. This was a woman who had been running on empty for far too long, carrying the weight of her children's needs and her own fears without anyone to share the burden. Mama, the little girl, Lily, said softly.
I'm hungry.
Emma's eyes closed briefly, and Jake saw her mouth tighten.
I know, baby. We'll get something to eat soon.
Jake made a decision that surprised even him. Listen, he said, leaning down to Emma's window level.
Why don't you let me give you a ride into town? I was heading there anyway.
You can still make your interview, and we can figure out what to do about the car later. Emma looked up at him with surprise and suspicion warring in her expression. That's very kind of you, but we couldn't impose like that.
You don't even know us.
Maybe not, Jake agreed. But I know what it's like to need help, and I know what it's like when there's no one around to offer it.
Besides, it's just a ride to town. No big deal.
He could see Emma weighing her options, none of which were particularly good. Stay here with the broken-down car and miss the job interview, or trust a stranger who seemed kind but was still a stranger nonetheless.
He seems nice, Mama, Sam piped up from the back seat.
And he has kind eyes.
Jake felt something warm unfurl in his chest at the boy's words. When was the last time someone had called his eyes kind? When was the last time anyone had looked at him with anything other than polite distance or well-meaning pity?
Please, Jake found himself saying, though he wasn't entirely sure why he was pushing so hard.
Let me help. It's a long walk to town, and it's going to be hot today. Emma looked at her children, then back at Jake. You're sure it's not too much trouble?
No trouble at all, Jake assured her, and he realized he meant it. 20 minutes later, Jake was loading Emma and the twins into his truck, along with the few belongings they'd managed to pull from their car. The children were wide-eyed with excitement about riding in a real ranch truck, and they peppered Jake with questions about the livestock they could see in the distance.
Are those your cows, Mr. Jake? Lily asked, pressing her nose against the window.
They are indeed, Jake replied, glancing at her in the rearview mirror.
We've got about 200 head on the ranch. Do you have horses? Sam wanted to know.
A few, Jake said, finding himself smiling at their enthusiasm.
Maybe you'll get to see them sometime.
It was a casual comment, the kind of thing adults said to children without really thinking about it, but something in the way the twins looked at each other made Jake realize they'd taken his words as a promise. As they drove toward Cedar Creek, Emma was quiet, staring out the window at the passing landscape. Jake could feel the tension radiating from her, the weight of uncertainty and worry that seemed to be her constant companion. Tell me about this job interview, he said, hoping to distract her from whatever dark thoughts were circling in her mind.
It's at Murphy's Diner, Emma said.
The owner, Mrs. Murphy, said she needed someone who could work flexible hours and wasn't afraid of hard work. The pay isn't much, but, like I said, it comes with a place to live.
Murphy's is a good place, Jake offered. Been there forever.
Mrs. Murphy's fair, and she treats her employees well. I hope so, Emma said quietly.
We really need this to work out.
Something in her tone made Jake glance over at her.
How long have you been traveling? Emma was quiet for so long that Jake thought she might not answer.
When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper.
3 months. We left California after I lost my job and couldn't make rent anymore.
I thought we could start over somewhere smaller, somewhere where the cost of living wasn't so crazy.
3 months.
Jake tried to imagine what it would be like to live in uncertainty for 3 months, to move from place to place with 2 young children, never knowing where you'd sleep or what you'd eat. He'd complained about loneliness, but at least he'd always had a roof over his head and food in his refrigerator. That must have been hard, he said simply.
Emma let out a shaky laugh. You could say that.
But we've managed.
The kids have been amazing through all of this.
Better than I deserve. Don't say that, Jake said firmly, surprising himself with his vehemence. From what I can see, you're doing everything you can to take care of them. That's what matters.
He meant it.
Watching Emma with her children, even in the short time he'd known them, he could see the fierce love and protection she offered them. She was exhausted and scared, but she was still fighting for them, still trying to build them a life worth living. As they reached the outskirts of Cedar Creek, Jake found himself driving more slowly than usual, reluctant to end this unexpected connection. The twins had fallen asleep in the back seat, their heads leaning against each other in the unconscious intimacy of siblings who had learned to find comfort in each other. "Mr. Morrison," Emma said suddenly, and Jake realized it was the first time she'd used his name.
"I can't thank you enough for this. You probably saved our lives back there."
"Jake," he corrected gently.
"And you don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same thing." Emma shook her head.
"No, they wouldn't have.
Most people would have driven right past. I know because it's happened before."
The sadness in her voice made Jake's chest tight.
How many times had this family been in trouble with no one to help them? How many people had looked the other way when they needed assistance?
"Well, you found someone who wouldn't drive past," he said quietly. As they pulled up in front of Murphy's Diner, a small building with red-checked curtains and a sign that had been hand-painted sometime in the 1970s, Jake felt an unexpected reluctance to let them go. In the span of an hour, these three strangers had somehow become important to him, and the thought of driving away and never seeing them again left him feeling oddly hollow.
"Good luck with the interview," he said as Emma gathered her purse and gently woke the children.
"Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes.
"For everything."
The twins were sleepy and confused as they climbed out of the truck, but they both turned to wave at Jake through the window.
"Bye, Mr. Jake,"
Lily called.
"Thank you for the ride. Will we see you again?" Sam asked, his serious dark eyes fixed on Jake's face. Jake felt something catch in his throat. "Maybe, son. You never know."
As he drove away, Jake caught sight of Emma and the twins in his rearview mirror, standing on the sidewalk in front of the diner.
Emma was smoothing down the children's hair and straightening their clothes, preparing for what might be the most important hour of their lives. Jake made it 3 blocks before he turned around and drove back.
He told himself he was just going to wait in the parking lot to make sure everything went okay, but deep down, he knew the truth. Something had shifted in his carefully ordered world, and he wasn't ready to let these 3 people disappear from his life just yet. As he sat in his truck outside Murphy's Diner, watching Emma through the window as she spoke earnestly to Mrs. Murphy while the twins colored on paper placemats, Jake Morrison began to suspect that his days of walking through life alone might be coming to an end. The interview lasted exactly 47 minutes. Jake knew because he'd been watching the clock on his dashboard, fighting the urge to pace in the parking lot like an expectant father. Through the large windows of Murphy's Diner, he could see Emma gesturing animatedly as she spoke with Mrs. Murphy, while the twins had found a booth near the back where they were carefully coloring and sharing what looked like a plate of cookies. When Emma finally emerged from the diner, Jake could read the outcome on her face before she'd even reached his truck. Her shoulders were set with determination, but there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there an hour ago. The twins bounced out behind her, their faces sticky with what appeared to be chocolate chip residue.
"How did it go?" Jake asked as Emma approached his passenger side window. Emma's smile was radiant, transforming her face completely. "I got it. I actually got it.
Mrs. Murphy said I can start tomorrow morning, and she's going to let us move into the apartment tonight."
Relief flooded through Jake's chest, surprising him with its intensity. "That's wonderful. I'm really happy for you."
"Mrs. Murphy said you've been sitting out here the whole time," Emma continued, her expression growing curious.
"That was very kind of you, but you didn't need to wait."
Jake found himself at a loss for words. How could he explain that he'd felt compelled to stay, that something about this woman and her children had awakened a protective instinct he'd thought died years ago? "I wanted to make sure everything worked out okay," he said finally.
"Can we see your ranch now, Mr. Jake?"
Sam piped up, apparently having overheard enough of the conversation to know they weren't in immediate danger anymore.
"You said we might get to see your horses." "Sam," Emma scolded gently.
"Mr. Morrison has been more than kind enough already.
We can't impose any more than we already have."
But Jake found himself looking into Sam's hopeful face, then at Lily, who was trying to hide her disappointment but not succeeding very well. Something in their expressions tugged at him, the way they looked at him like he might be the answer to prayers they hadn't known they were making. "It's not an imposition," Jake heard himself saying. If you'd like to see the ranch, you're welcome to come out for a visit. Maybe this weekend, when you've had a chance to get settled." Emma hesitated, clearly torn between her children's excitement and her own caution about accepting more help from someone she barely knew. "That's very generous, but we couldn't." "Please, Mama?" Lily asked softly. "We've never seen a real ranch before." "It would just be for the afternoon," Jake added quickly. "I could show the kids around, maybe let them meet the horses. And I make a decent barbecue if you're interested in dinner." Emma looked at her children, then back at Jake. There was something vulnerable in her expression, as if she was wrestling with the desire to accept his kindness and the fear that came with trusting someone new. "Why are you being so nice to us?" she asked suddenly. "We're complete strangers." It was a fair question, and Jake wished he had a better answer. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because I know what it's like to need help and not have anywhere to turn. Maybe because your kids remind me of what it was like to believe in good people and happy endings." Emma studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his intentions. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "Saturday afternoon?" she asked. "Saturday afternoon," Jake confirmed, feeling something warm settle in his chest. The rest of the week passed in a blur for Jake. He found himself thinking about Emma and the twins more often than he cared to admit, wondering how they were settling in, whether Emma was finding the work at the diner manageable, whether the kids were adjusting to their new temporary home. He caught himself driving through town more frequently than usual, always finding some excuse to pass by Murphy's diner, though he never stopped. On Friday evening, as Jake was finishing up his chores around the ranch, he realized he was nervous about the next day's visit. When was the last time he'd had guests? When was the last time he'd cared about making a good impression? He found himself looking at his house with critical eyes, seeing the dust that had accumulated on surfaces, the sparse decoration that spoke of a man who'd given up trying to make a house feel like a home. Saturday morning found Jake cleaning with an energy he hadn't felt in years. He dusted furniture, vacuumed carpets that rarely saw visitors, and even picked wildflowers from the field behind his house to put in a mason jar on the kitchen table. It wasn't much, but it was something. At exactly 2 o'clock, Jake heard the sound of a car coming up his long gravel driveway. He looked out the window to see a beat-up taxi struggling with the rough road, and he realized that Emma and the twins had no other way to get to his ranch. Their car was still broken down on the side of the road where he'd found them. Jake walked out to meet them, arriving just as the taxi driver was helping unload his passengers. Emma looked nervous but determined, dressed in a simple blue sundress that made her look younger and less careworn. The twins, however, were practically vibrating with excitement. "Mr. Jake!" Lily called, running toward him as soon as her feet hit the ground. "We're really here. At a real ranch." "That you are," Jake said, catching her in a brief hug that felt surprisingly natural. "Ready for the grand tour?" Sam was more reserved than his sister, but Jake could see the wonder in his eyes as he took in the vast expanse of the Double M Ranch. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, dotted with cattleland, painted in the green and gold of late summer grass. In the distance, the Rocky Mountains rose like ancient guardians, their peaks touched with snow even in the heat of August. "It's so big," Sam said quietly. "How do you take care of all of it?" "Very carefully," Jake replied with a smile. "And with a lot of help from good horses and smarter cows." Emma paid the taxi driver and joined them, her eyes wide as she took in the scope of Jake's property. "This is incredible," she said. "I had no idea it would be so beautiful." "Wait until you see the rest," Jake said, feeling an unexpected pride in showing off his home. "Come on, let's start with the horses. I think that's what somebody's been most excited about." The twins practically skipped as Jake led them toward the barn, their chatter filling the air with a liveliness that the ranch hadn't experienced in years. Emma walked beside Jake, and he found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she moved, the soft sound of her laughter when one of the children said something particularly amusing. The barn was Jake's pride and joy, a structure he'd rebuilt himself after a fire had destroyed the original building 5 years earlier. It was spacious and airy, with tall ceilings and wide stalls that housed his small collection of horses. The smell of hay and leather and contented animals created an atmosphere that Jake had always found peaceful, but seeing it through the children's eyes made him appreciate it anew.
"Oh my goodness," Lily breathed as they entered the barn. "They're so beautiful."
Jake's 4 horses were indeed beautiful, each one carefully chosen and lovingly cared for. There was Thunder, a massive black gelding with a gentle disposition; Sunrise, a Palomino mare with a coat that gleamed like gold; Cookie, a paint horse with distinctive markings and a fondness for treats; and Penny, a smaller chestnut mare that Jake had bought specifically because she was good with children, though he'd never had occasion to test that theory.
"Can we pet them?"
Sam asked, his voice hushed with awe.
"Absolutely," Jake said.
"But first, let me teach you the right way to approach a horse. These are big animals, and they need to trust you before they'll let you get close." For the next hour, Jake found himself playing teacher as he showed the twins how to hold out their hands for the horses to sniff, how to stroke their necks gently, how to offer carrots and apple slices from flat palms. Emma watched from nearby, her camera phone capturing every moment of wonder and delight on her children's faces. "They're so gentle," Emma marveled as Thunder nuzzled Sam's hair, making the little boy giggle.
"Horses are good judges of character," Jake said. "They can sense kindness in people. Your kids have good hearts." Emma's smile was soft and proud. "They've been through so much in the past few months. It's good to see them just be children again."
There was something in her tone that made Jake want to know more about what they'd been through, but he sensed that Emma wasn't ready to share the details of their story. Instead, he focused on the present, on the joy of watching 2 children experience the wonder of connecting with animals they'd only seen in books and movies. "Mr. Jake," Lily said suddenly, looking up at him with serious dark eyes.
"Do you live here all by yourself?"
"I do," Jake replied, crouching down to her level.
"Don't you get lonely?" Sam asked, joining his sister.
The question hit Jake like a physical blow, not because it was intrusive, but because it was so perceptive.
Out of the mouths of babes, he thought.
"Sometimes," he admitted. "But I have the horses and the cattle to keep me company." "That's not the same as people, though," Lily said with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood.
"No," Jake agreed quietly. "It's not the same as people."
He glanced over at Emma, who was watching the conversation with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met for a moment, and Jake felt something pass between them, an understanding or recognition that neither of them was quite ready to name. "Come on," Jake said, standing up and brushing hay from his knees.
"Let me show you the rest of the ranch.
We've got a creek running through the back pasture that's perfect for skipping stones." The afternoon flew by in a blur of exploration and discovery. Jake showed them the vegetable garden his mother had planted decades ago and that he'd maintained in her memory. He taught the twins how to skip stones across the creek and how to identify the different types of wildflowers that grew in the meadows. They climbed the hill behind the house to get a better view of the surrounding countryside, and Jake pointed out landmarks and told stories about the history of the land. Emma seemed to relax as the day progressed, her laughter coming more easily, her smiles reaching her eyes. She asked thoughtful questions about ranch life, about the challenges and rewards of living so far from town, about what it was like to be responsible for so much land and so many animals. "It sounds like a lot of work," she observed as they made their way back toward the house.
"It is," Jake agreed.
"But it's good work.
Honest work.
And there's something satisfying about ending each day knowing you've taken care of something that depends on you."
"I can understand that," Emma said softly. "That's how I feel about the twins.
They depend on me, and that gives my life purpose, even when everything else feels uncertain." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Jake fired up the grill and cooked hamburgers while Emma and the twins explored his house. He could hear their voices drifting through the open windows, the children's excited chatter mixing with Emma's softer responses.
"Mr. Jake," Sam appeared at his elbow as Jake was flipping burgers. "Can I ask you something?"
"Of course, buddy.
What's on your mind?" Sam looked uncharacteristically serious for a 7-year-old. "Do you think we could live here? On your ranch?"
The question caught Jake completely off guard.
"What do you mean?"
"I mean live here for real," Sam continued. "Mama works really hard, she's always worried about money and finding places for us to live. But here there's lots of space, and the horses, and you seem like you could take care of us." Jake felt his throat constrict. "Sam, that's a big question. What does your mama think about living here?" "We haven't talked to her about it yet," Lily said, appearing suddenly, with the ability children had to materialize when least expected. "But we think it would solve everybody's problems." "What problems?" Jake asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Mama's problem of not having enough money and always being scared," Sam said matter-of-factly. "And your problem of being lonely." The simplicity of their logic was devastating. Jake looked at these two children who barely knew him, who were willing to trust him with their safety and their futures, and felt something crack open in his chest. "Kids, it's not that simple," he said gently. "Adults have to think about a lot of things when they make decisions about where to live." "But, do you think it's a good idea?" Lily pressed. Jake was saved from having to answer by Emma's voice calling from the house. "Sam! Lily! Come wash your hands for dinner." The twins exchanged a meaningful look that was far too mature for their age, then ran toward the house, leaving Jake standing by the grill with his mind spinning and his heart racing. Dinner was a lively affair, with conversation flowing easily around Jake's kitchen table. The twins regaled Emma with stories of their adventures, describing every horse, every flower, every stone they'd skipped across the creek. Emma listened with the patient attention of a mother who understood that these memories would be treasured long after the day was over. "This has been wonderful," Emma said as they finished eating. "The kids are going to talk about today for months." "It's been my pleasure," Jake said, and meant it. "I can't remember the last time this house felt so alive." Emma smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. "I should probably call a taxi soon. It's getting late, and the kids have had enough excitement for one day." "Before we go," Sam said suddenly, looking at his sister with determination. "Lily, and I want to ask you something." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Sam." But Sam was already launching into his proposal with the fearless honesty of childhood. "Mr. Jake, Mama, we've been thinking. Mr. Jake is lonely living here all by himself, and, Mama, you're always worried about money and finding places to live. So we thought maybe you could get married and we could all live here together." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's face went white, then red, and Jake felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Both adults stared at the children in shock, trying to process what had just been suggested with such innocent conviction. "Kids," Emma started, her voice strangled. "You can't just, people don't just." "Why not?" Lily asked genuinely. "You like each other, we can tell. And Mr. Jake needs a family, and we need a home. It makes perfect sense." "Lily, Sam," Emma said, her composure clearly hanging by a thread. "What you're suggesting isn't how things work. People get married because they love each other, not to solve practical problems." "But couldn't you learn to love each other?" Sam asked with the logic of youth. "You're both nice people, and nice people can love each other if they try." Jake found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Kids, your mama is right. Marriage isn't something you do just because it seems convenient." But even as he said the words, Jake was thinking about the loneliness that filled his house every night, about the way Emma's laughter had made his kitchen feel like a home again, about how right it had felt to have a family around his table. "We know you think we're just kids," Lily said with dignity beyond her years. "But we see things grown-ups sometimes miss. We see that Mr. Jake smiles more when we're here, and Mama looks less scared when someone else is helping take care of us." Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm so sorry," she said to Jake, her face burning with embarrassment. "I don't know where they got this idea. Kids, we need to go home right now." "But, Mama," Sam protested. "We're just trying to help. We want you to be happy." "I am happy," Emma said firmly, though Jake could hear the strain in her voice. "And what would make me happiest right now is if we went home and forgot this conversation ever happened." Jake watched Emma gather their things with sharp, efficient movements, her embarrassment radiating from every gesture. The twins looked confused and hurt, clearly not understanding why their perfectly reasonable solution had caused such a strong reaction.
Emma, Jake said quietly as she helped the children put on their jackets. They're just kids. They don't understand.
I know, Emma replied without looking at him.
And I'm mortified. We shouldn't have come. This was a mistake.
No, Jake said more firmly.
It wasn't a mistake.
Today was one of the best days I've had in years. Emma finally looked at him, and Jake could see tears threatening in her eyes.
They had no right to put you in that position. To assume that you would want, that we would be. That I would want what? Jake asked gently. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it, shaking her head. It doesn't matter.
Could you please call us a taxi? As Jake made the call, he found himself watching Emma and the twins, who were now sitting quietly on his couch, the joy of the day replaced by confusion and disappointment. Sam was holding his sister's hand, both of them looking like they'd somehow failed at something important without understanding how. The taxi arrived 20 minutes later, 20 minutes of awkward silence broken only by Lily asking if they'd done something wrong and Emma assuring her they hadn't while avoiding Jake's eyes. As they prepared to leave, the twins approached Jake one more time.
Thank you for showing us your ranch, Sam said formally, like a little adult. We had a really good time.
We're sorry if we made you uncomfortable, Lily added, her voice small.
We just wanted everyone to be happy.
Jake crouched down to their level, his heart breaking for these children who'd shown him more love and acceptance in one day than he'd received in years.
You didn't make me uncomfortable, he said truthfully. And you didn't do anything wrong.
You were trying to take care of the people you love, and that makes you very special kids.
But we can't come back, can we? Sam asked with the perceptiveness that seemed to run in the family.
Jake looked over at Emma, who was standing by the door with her arms wrapped around herself like armor.
I hope you can, he said quietly. But that's up to your mama.
Emma met his eyes for the first time since the children's proposition, and Jake saw something there that looked like regret mixed with fear.
Thank you for today, she said softly. It was wonderful. The kids will never forget it. What about you? Jake asked before he could stop himself. Will you forget it? Emma's smile was sad and complicated. No, she said. I don't think I will.
As the taxi disappeared down his driveway, Jake stood on his porch looking out at the ranch that suddenly felt emptier than it had in years. The house behind him seemed to echo with the ghosts of the day's laughter, and he could still smell the faint scent of Emma's perfume in his kitchen. 2 children had asked him to marry their mother, and, instead of being offended or amused, Jake found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, they might have been onto something after all. That night, as Jake lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the image of Emma's face when the twins had made their innocent proposal. Beneath the embarrassment, beneath the fear, he'd seen something else. Something that looked almost like hope. The question that kept him awake until dawn was whether he'd imagined it, or whether Emma Chen might be as lonely as he was, and just as scared to admit it. For 3 weeks after the visit to Jake's ranch, life in Cedar Creek fell into a routine that Emma desperately wanted to trust but couldn't quite believe in. The job at Murphy's Diner was everything Mrs. Murphy had promised: steady work with decent tips, flexible hours that allowed her to be with the twins after school, and a small apartment above the restaurant that felt like a palace compared to sleeping in their car. The twins had enrolled in Cedar Creek Elementary, where they were slowly beginning to open up to their classmates and teachers. Every day they came home with stories about their new friends, their favorite subjects, and the wonders of having a permanent address. But every day they also asked the same question: when could they see Mr. Jake again? Emma had been avoiding that question for 3 weeks, just as she'd been avoiding driving past the road that led to the Double M Ranch, just as she'd been avoiding thinking about the way Jake Morrison had looked at her when her children had made their innocent but devastating proposition. She told herself she was being practical, protecting herself and her children from getting too attached to someone who was probably just being kind to strangers in need. But, late at night, when the twins were asleep and the diner was quiet below her, Emma found herself remembering the way Jake's house had felt like a home, the way he'd listened to her children with genuine interest, the way his eyes had softened when Sam had asked if they could live on the ranch. She remembered the moment when their eyes had met over dinner, when she'd felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the possibility that she might not have to carry the weight of the world alone anymore. The problem was that Emma Chen had learned not to trust possibilities. She'd trusted her ex-husband's promises that he would change, that he would stop drinking, that he would help support their children. She trusted her own judgment that she could hold their small family together through sheer force of will. She trusted that hard work and determination would be enough to build a stable life for the twins. All of those trusts had been broken, leaving Emma with a fierce independence that was equal parts strength and defense mechanism. She would not let herself or her children depend on someone else's kindness again, no matter how genuine it seemed. But the twins had no such reservations about trust, which was how Emma found herself standing outside Murphy's diner on a Thursday afternoon, watching through the window as Jake Morrison sat in a corner booth with Sam and Lily, all three of them laughing over shared milkshakes. Emma's heart stopped for a moment before racing into overdrive. What was Jake doing here? How long had he been coming to the diner? And why were her children sitting with him like they'd been expecting him? She pushed through the front door with more force than necessary, causing the bell to jangle loudly and drawing the attention of every customer in the small restaurant. Jake looked up immediately, his face showing a mixture of guilt and defiance that made Emma's chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. "Mama!" Lily called out happily. "Look who's here! Mr. Jake came to visit us." Emma forced a smile for her daughter's sake, but her eyes were fixed on Jake as she approached their table. "Mr. Morrison," she said coolly. "This is unexpected." "Mrs. Chen," Jake replied, standing politely. "I hope you don't mind. I was in town on business, and I thought I'd stop by for coffee. I ran into the kids, and they insisted I join them." It was a plausible explanation, but Emma could read the truth in the way Jake avoided her eyes. This hadn't been a chance encounter. He'd come here specifically to see them, and somehow her children had known he would. "How did you know to look for Mr. Jake?" Emma asked Sam, keeping her voice light despite the suspicion growing in her mind. Sam had the grace to look slightly guilty. "We might have asked Mrs. Murphy if she knew when he usually came to town," he admitted. "And we might have been coming to the diner after school every day this week," Lily added helpfully. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, processing the information. Her 7-year-old children had been conducting surveillance operations to orchestrate a reunion with Jake Morrison. The thought would have been amusing if it weren't so concerning. "Kids, why don't you finish your milkshakes while I talk to Mr. Morrison outside?" Emma suggested, though it was clearly not a suggestion. Jake nodded and followed Emma out onto the sidewalk, where the afternoon sun was beginning to slant toward evening. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both aware that they were being watched through the diner window by two very interested children. "I'm sorry," Jake said finally. "I probably should have asked before coming to see them." "Yes, you should have," Emma agreed, though she was surprised to find that her anger was already fading. "But I understand why you didn't. They can be pretty persuasive when they want something." Jake's smile was rueful. "They've been asking me to come see them every day for the past week. They somehow got my phone number and have been calling me after school." Emma felt her face flush with embarrassment. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I had no idea they were bothering you." "They weren't bothering me," Jake said quickly. "I actually looked forward to their calls. They tell me about their day at school, about their friends, about what they learned in class. It's been nice." There was something in his voice that made Emma look at him more closely. Jake Morrison was a successful rancher, a grown man with his own life and responsibilities. But when he talked about her children's phone calls, he sounded almost grateful, as if those conversations had been the highlight of his days. "They talk about you constantly," Emma admitted. "Every conversation somehow comes back to Mr. Jake and the ranch and when they can go back to see the horses." "And what do you tell them?" Jake asked quietly. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture that had become automatic whenever she felt vulnerable. "I tell them that you have your own life, and we can't expect you to entertain two kids who aren't your responsibility." "What if I want them to be my responsibility?" Jake asked suddenly, then seemed surprised that he'd spoken the words aloud.
Emma stared at him. What do you mean?
Jake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emma was beginning to recognize as a sign that he was struggling with something difficult.
I mean that in the 3 weeks since you visited the ranch, I've realized something.
I'm 42 years old, and I've been living like I'm waiting for my life to start.
But when you and the kids were there, it felt like maybe it already had.
Emma felt something flutter in her chest that she tried to suppress.
Jake. I know what the kids asked was crazy, he continued.
I know we barely know each other, and I know you have every reason to be cautious about letting someone into your life.
But what if we got to know each other? What if we tried being friends and saw where that led?
Friends, Emma repeated, as if testing the word.
Friends, Jake confirmed.
People who care about each other's well-being. People who help each other when times are tough. People who maybe share Sunday dinners and help kids with homework and split the cost of groceries. Despite herself, Emma found herself smiling at his description. That sounds suspiciously like a marriage proposal disguised as a friendship offer.
Jake's face flushed red. That's not. I didn't mean.
I'm teasing, Emma said gently, surprised by her own playfulness. But, you have to admit, it sounds like more than friendship.
Maybe it could be, Jake said quietly. Someday.
If we both wanted it to be. Emma looked through the diner window at her children, who were pretending to focus on their milkshakes while obviously straining to read lips. Sam caught her eye and gave her an encouraging thumbs up, which made Emma laugh despite herself. They're going to be impossible if they think they were right about this, she said.
Were they right? Jake asked. About us, I mean. Emma considered the question seriously. Was there something between her and Jake Morrison?
The attraction was undeniable, but Emma had learned that attraction wasn't enough to build a life on. But there was something else, something in the way he looked at her children with genuine affection, something in the way he made her feel safe without making her feel weak.
I don't know, she said honestly. I'm scared to find out.
What are you scared of?
Jake asked.
Everything, Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it.
I'm scared of trusting someone and having them leave.
I'm scared of letting my kids get attached to someone who might disappear from their lives. I'm scared of being a burden to someone who's been perfectly happy living alone.
What if I'm scared too? Jake said softly. What if I'm scared of being alone for the rest of my life? What if I'm scared that I've forgotten how to be part of a family? What if I'm scared that I'm not good enough for you and your kids? Emma looked at him with surprise. You're scared of not being good enough?
Jake, you're successful, you're kind, you're stable.
You're everything a single mother dreams about finding.
And you're everything a lonely man dreams about finding, Jake replied. A woman who's strong enough to take care of herself and her children, brave enough to start over when life gets difficult, loving enough to raise kids who think the best solution to loneliness is to help people find each other. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, both aware that they were standing at a crossroads. Emma could feel the weight of decision pressing down on her, the knowledge that whatever she said next would change the trajectory of all their lives.
Mama! Mr. Jake! Sam's voice interrupted her thoughts as both children burst through the diner door.
Mrs. Murphy says she has to close soon, and she wants to know if Mr. Jake is staying for dinner. And she says she's making pot roast tonight, which is your favorite, Mama, Lily added helpfully.
Emma looked at Jake, who was clearly trying not to laugh at the children's lack of subtlety. What do you think? He asked. Should I stay for pot roast? Do you like pot roast? Emma asked, though she was really asking something else entirely.
I love pot roast, Jake said, and Emma could hear that he was answering both questions. Especially when it's shared with good company. An hour later, Emma found herself sitting across from Jake at a corner table in Murphy's diner, watching him listen patiently as the twins explained the complex social dynamics of second grade. Mrs. Murphy had insisted on closing the diner early and cooking for them in her own apartment upstairs, claiming that she wanted to hear all about how the Chen family was settling into Cedar Creek. But Emma suspected that Mrs. Murphy, like everyone else in the small town, was invested in the developing relationship between the single mother and the lonely rancher. Small towns loved a good love story, and Emma was beginning to realize that she and Jake had become the subject of considerable local speculation. So then, Ashley said that Tyler likes Rebecca, but Tyler told Michael that he actually likes Jennifer, but Jennifer likes David, who doesn't like anyone because he says girls are gross, Lily explained seriously, as if she were discussing international diplomacy. That does sound complicated, Jake agreed with equal seriousness.
What did you think about all this drama?
I think Tyler should just tell Jennifer that he likes her instead of telling Michael, Sam interjected.
Adults always say that honesty is the best policy.
Jake's eyes met Emma's across the table, and she could see the humor dancing in them.
That's very wise advice, he said. Sometimes adults forget how simple things can be when you're honest about your feelings. Like how you and Mama like each other, but you're both too scared to admit it?
Lily asked with devastating innocence.
Emma nearly choked on her coffee.
Lily Chen.
What? Lily asked, genuinely confused. It's obvious.
You smile different when Mr. Jake is here, and Mr. Jake can't stop looking at you when he thinks you're not watching.
Jake coughed, his face turning red.
I wasn't.
Yes, you were, Sam said matter-of-factly. It's okay, though. We like it when you look at Mama like that. It makes her happy. How can you possibly know that? Emma asked, torn between mortification and curiosity.
Because you stopped looking sad all the time, Lily explained simply.
Ever since we met Mr. Jake, you've been smiling more.
Real smiles, not the ones you do when you're trying to make us feel better about something. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes.
Had she been that transparent? Had her children been carrying the weight of her sadness without her realizing it? Mama, Sam said gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. We just want you to be happy. Really happy, not just pretend happy. And we think Mr. Jake makes you really happy, Lily added. Just like you and Mama make Mr. Jake happy, right, Mr. Jake?
Jake looked at Emma, and in his eyes she could see the same vulnerability she was feeling.
Yes, he said quietly. You do make me happy. Happier than I've been in a very long time.
Emma felt something shift inside her chest, like a wall that had been protecting her heart for years finally, beginning to crack.
You make me happy too, she admitted softly. And that terrifies me. Why does it terrify you? Jake asked gently.
Emma looked at her children, who were watching the conversation with the intense focus of people who understood that adult emotions were complicated but important.
Because I don't know how to do this, she said. I don't know how to trust someone with my heart again. I don't know how to let someone help me without feeling weak. I don't know how to believe that someone could love us enough to stay. What if we figured it out together? Jake suggested. What if we took it slow and gave ourselves time to learn how to trust each other? What would that look like? Emma asked. Jake thought for a moment. Maybe it would look like me coming to dinner once a week. Maybe it would look like you and the kids coming to the ranch on weekends when you want to. Maybe it would look like us getting to know each other as friends first, and seeing if friendship could grow into something more. And if it doesn't? Emma asked. If we try this and it doesn't work out? Then, we'll deal with that when it happens, Jake said simply. But what if it does work out? What if we could build something beautiful together? Emma looked at her children, who were holding hands under the table and watching her with expressions of hope and love and unwavering faith in her ability to make the right decision. Then, she looked at Jake, who was waiting patiently for her answer, his own hope carefully controlled but visible in the depths of his eyes. Okay, she said quietly. Let's try being friends and see what happens. The smile that spread across Jake's face was radiant, transforming his features and making Emma's heart skip a beat. Really? Really, Emma confirmed, then looked at her children. But no more matchmaking schemes, understood? If this is going to work, it has to happen naturally. We understand, Sam said solemnly, though he was practically bouncing in his seat with excitement. We promise to be good, Lily added, then paused. But we're still allowed to be happy about it, right? Emma laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Yes, you're allowed to be happy about it. We're all allowed to be happy about it. As they walked back to the apartment above the diner that night, the twins chattering excitedly about plans for the weekend and possibilities they'd only dreamed about before, Emma found herself thinking about the strange turns life could take. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a single mother struggling to build a stable life for her children. Tonight, she was a woman who had just agreed to explore the possibility of love with a man who looked at her children like they were precious gifts. It was scary and wonderful and completely unexpected, but, for the first time in years, Emma Chen felt like she might be exactly where she was supposed to be. And, as Jake's truck followed them slowly down the street, making sure they got home safely, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her children's impossible dream might not be so impossible after all. The next morning, Emma woke up to the sound of her phone ringing. She glanced at the clock and saw that it was barely 6 a.m., which immediately sent her into panic mode. Early morning calls usually meant emergencies. But, when she answered the phone, Jake's voice was calm and slightly amused. "I'm sorry to call so early, but I have 2 very determined children on my ranch who insisted that I needed to invite you for breakfast." "What?" Emma sat up in bed, confused. "What children?" "Your children," Jake said. "They apparently snuck out of the apartment sometime before dawn and walked to my ranch. They're currently making pancakes in my kitchen and informing me that you're probably worried sick about them." Emma was out of bed and pulling on clothes before Jake finished his sentence. "Oh my God, I had no idea they were gone. Are they okay? How did they even find your ranch in the dark?" "They're fine," Jake assured her quickly. "A little tired from the walk, but very proud of themselves. And, apparently Sam has an excellent sense of direction and Lily brought a flashlight." "I am going to kill them," Emma muttered, grabbing her keys. "Both of them." Slowly. Jake's laughter was warm through the phone. "Don't be too hard on them. They said they wanted to surprise us with breakfast as a way of celebrating our new friendship." Emma paused in her rush toward the door. "They walked 5 miles in the dark to make us breakfast?" "It appears so. They've also informed me that pancakes taste better when they're made by kids who are happy about their mama finding love." Emma felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "They said that?" "They did." Along with several other observations about adult relationships that were both insightful and terrifying coming from 7-year-olds. Emma laughed despite her worry. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Try to keep them from burning down your kitchen. I think we're safe. They're surprisingly competent cooks. Although they did mention that you taught them to cook because you wanted them to be independent." "I wanted them to be able to take care of themselves," Emma said softly. "I never wanted them to feel like they had to." "I know," Jake said gently. "And that's one of the many things that makes you an amazing mother. But maybe it's time to let them see what it looks like when people take care of each other out of love, not necessity." Emma felt tears threaten for the second time in 12 hours. "How do you always know exactly the right thing to say?" "I don't," Jake admitted. "I'm just saying what I feel, and hoping that's enough." As Emma drove through the early morning light toward the Double M Ranch, she thought about what Jake had said. Maybe it was time to let her children see what healthy love looked like, what it meant to be part of a family where people chose each other every day, where support was given freely and received gracefully. When she pulled into Jake's driveway, she could see smoke rising from his chimney and the warm glow of lights in his kitchen windows. As she walked toward the house, she could hear laughter and the sound of music playing softly, and, for the breakfast the twins had prepared was surprisingly edible, if slightly lopsided. Emma sat at Jake's kitchen table, watching her children serve pancakes with the pride of accomplished chefs, and tried to reconcile her terror at their early morning adventure with her amazement at their resourcefulness. They had walked 5 miles in the pre-dawn darkness because they wanted to do something nice for the 2 adults they were determined to see together. "We're really sorry we scared you, Mama," Lily said as she carefully poured orange juice into glasses. "But we wanted to surprise you, and we knew you wouldn't let us walk here by ourselves if we asked." You're absolutely right, I wouldn't have, Emma said firmly. And, you're both grounded for the next week for sneaking out. But. She paused, looking at their hopeful faces. I'm also proud of how well you took care of each other and how thoughtful you were trying to be. Sam beamed at her. So we're grounded, but proudly grounded? Jake choked on his coffee. Is that a thing?
Apparently it is now, Emma said, shooting him a look that was half exasperation and half amusement.
Though I'm hoping it doesn't become a regular occurrence. We promise we won't sneak out again, Lily said solemnly.
But only if you promise that we can come visit Mr. Jake regularly so we don't have to sneak. Emma felt herself being maneuvered by two very clever 7-year-olds, but she had to admire their negotiation skills.
How about this?
Mr. Jake and I will figure out a schedule for visits that works for everyone, and you two will ask permission before you go anywhere, even if you think it's for a good cause.
Deal, Sam said immediately, offering his hand for a formal handshake.
As Emma shook hands with her son, she caught Jake watching them with an expression that was soft and wondering.
What? She asked.
Just thinking about how lucky these kids are to have you as their mom, he said quietly.
You managed to be firm and understanding at the same time. That's not easy.
Emma felt warmth spread through her chest.
You'd be surprised how often I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm mostly making it up as I go along.
I think that's what all good parents do, Jake replied.
The fact that you worry about doing it right probably means you're doing it right.
They spent the rest of the morning exploring the ranch again, but this time Emma found herself paying attention to different details. She noticed the way Jake's eyes lit up when he talked about improvements he wanted to make to the property. She saw how naturally he included the twins in every conversation, asking their opinions about everything from which fence needed repairing first to what color he should paint the barn. She watched him teach Sam how to properly stack hay bales, and she saw the patience in his movements, the way he explained each step clearly and praised the boy's efforts. She observed him braiding Lily's hair when it kept getting in her face, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he worked. Most importantly, Emma began to see Jake not just as a kind stranger who had helped them, but as a man who might genuinely want to be part of their lives. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying.
Emma?
Jake's voice interrupted her thoughts. They were sitting on his front porch while the twins played with a litter of barn kittens they'd discovered.
Can I ask you something personal?
I suppose that depends on what it is, Emma said cautiously.
What happened with their father? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I'd like to understand what you've been through.
Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching her children laugh as tiny kittens climbed all over them. She'd known this conversation would come eventually, but that didn't make it any easier. His name was David, she said finally. We met in college, got married young, had the twins right away. For a while, it was good. He was charming and funny, and he seemed to love being a father.
What changed? Jake asked gently. He started drinking more.
At first it was just weekends, then it was every evening after work, then it was starting earlier and earlier each day. He lost his job, then another one, then another. I was working 2 jobs trying to keep us afloat while he made promises he never kept. Emma's voice was steady, but Jake could see the pain in her profile. The drinking made him angry, and the anger made him mean. He never hurt the kids physically, but he would say terrible things to them when he was drunk. Tell them they were too loud, too demanding, that they were the reason he couldn't be happy.
Jake felt anger surge in his chest. Emma, I'm sorry.
I stayed longer than I should have because I kept thinking he would get better, that he would get help, that he would remember how to be the man I'd married. But, one night, Sam asked me why Daddy hated us so much, and I realized I couldn't protect them from the truth anymore.
So you left?
I left, filed for divorce, and tried to build a new life for us in California.
David disappeared completely after that.
No child support, no contact, nothing.
It was actually a relief.
Jake was quiet for a moment, processing what she'd told him.
How long ago was that?
2 years.
We did okay for a while.
I had a good job as a medical office manager, the kids were in a good school, we had a little apartment near the beach. But, then, the medical practice got bought out by a larger company, and they eliminated my position. I couldn't find another job that paid enough to cover rent and childcare, and we got evicted.
That's when you started traveling? Emma nodded.
I thought if we could get to a smaller town, somewhere with a lower cost of living, I could make it work. But, it's hard to get a job when you don't have a permanent address, and it's hard to get a permanent address when you don't have a job. You've been carrying all of this alone, Jake said, and it wasn't a question.
I had to. There wasn't anyone else.
Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jake could hear the exhaustion underneath it. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, he said quietly.
Emma turned to look at him.
Jake, we barely know each other.
You can't just decide to take on someone else's problems. I'm not taking on your problems, Jake said firmly. I'm offering to share them. There's a difference. Is there?
Because from where I sit, it looks like you'd be taking on a woman with trust issues and 2 kids who aren't yours and a whole lot of emotional baggage. Jake was quiet for a moment, watching Sam and Lily, who were now lying in the grass letting the kittens walk across their backs.
Can I tell you something? He said finally.
Of course.
I was married before.
Her name was Sarah, and I loved her more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. We tried for years to have children, but Sarah kept miscarrying.
After the 3rd time, she couldn't handle it anymore.
She blamed herself, blamed me, blamed God. The grief ate away at everything good between us until there was nothing left but pain.
Emma felt her heart ache for him. I'm sorry, Jake. She left on a Tuesday morning. Just packed her things and said she couldn't pretend to be happy anymore. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, and I haven't seen her since.
How long ago was that?
5 years.
5 years of telling myself that I was better off alone, that I didn't need anyone, that wanting a family was just asking for heartbreak. Jake looked at Emma directly. But then, I met you and the twins, and suddenly, I remembered what I'd been missing. Not just having people around, but having people who matter, people who make the good times better and the bad times bearable. Emma felt tears threaten.
Jake. I'm not asking you to fix my loneliness, Emma. I'm asking you to let me help fix yours. I'm asking you to let me be part of your family, not because you need me, but because I need you.
What if it doesn't work?
Emma asked, voicing her deepest fear.
What if we try this and it falls apart and my kids get hurt? What if it does work?
Jake countered.
What if we try this and build something beautiful? What if those kids get to grow up in a house full of love with parents who choose each other every day? Emma looked at her children, who had noticed the serious conversation happening on the porch and were watching with concerned expressions. Sam gave her a small wave and a thumbs up, as if to say that whatever she decided, he trusted her judgment.
I'm scared, Emma admitted.
Me too, Jake said. But I'm more scared of letting you walk away and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. That evening, after they'd returned to town and the twins were finally asleep, Emma sat on the small couch in their apartment above the diner and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. In the span of 12 hours, her children had scared 10 years off her life, she'd shared her most painful secrets with a man she was still getting to know, and she'd begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could all build something together. Her phone rang, and she saw Jake's name on the screen.
Hi, she said softly.
Hi. I just wanted to make sure you were okay after everything today.
I know it was a lot.
Emma smiled despite herself.
Which part? My children's criminal behavior or my emotional breakdown? Jake's laughter was warm through the phone.
Both, I guess.
Though I wouldn't call either of those things criminal or a breakdown.
No? What would you call them? I'd call them signs that you're all ready to start trusting people again, Jake said.
And I'd call that a good thing. Emma curled up on the couch, pulling a blanket around herself. Can I ask you something? Anything. When you were married before, were you happy? Really happy?
Jake was quiet for a moment.
For a while, yes. Sarah and I were good together when things were good.
But we couldn't weather the hard times, and I think that's what made the difference.
What do you mean?
I mean that being happy when everything's going well is easy. The real test of a relationship is what happens when things get difficult.
Can you support each other? Can you communicate honestly? Can you work together to solve problems instead of letting them tear you apart?
Emma thought about her marriage to David, about how quickly their happiness had crumbled when real life got in the way.
David and I never learned how to do that.
When things got hard, he retreated into alcohol and I retreated into trying to control everything myself.
But that doesn't mean you can. First time in years, Emma Chen felt like she was coming home.